Homework is Pointless. Written by Lemon_Lime26. Dubbed by Melberry Stars. Summary. Midoriya, can you tell me the answer to question 5, please? Aizawa said, holding out a piece of paper in front of him. Izuku glanced at it. 46? Aizawa nodded, setting the paper down. Are you aware of the fact that that question was on your math homework last night? Izuku gave him a confused look, unsure of where he was going with this. Midoriya, I called you in here to find out why you aren't doing the homework assigned to you by your teachers. Izuku blinked a few times before answering the question he felt was obvious. It's pointless? Ever since the day Izuku was announced quirkless, he knew he'd never be treated fairly. He was 5 years old when he stopped being affected by insults. Normally, he could be forgotten by his teachers or played by the kids who cared enough to earn himself some sympathy or be ignored. Izuku, when he was 6, learned to never attract attention to himself. His peers were awful, which was incredibly ironic considering that they all wanted to be heroes when they got older. But he managed to make it through school, for the most part. At the age of 9, Izuku learned what it was like to have someone's quirk used on him. However, one thing was always consistent. The teachers didn't care. Or at least they didn't until he got into middle school. Izuku was smart, really smart, and he knew it. Schoolwork was always so easy for him, barely taking any effort to complete. He thought of it as a blessing for most of his life, one mercy in a sea of crap. Yet, it seems that his middle school teachers were not happy with the fact that a quirkless kid was smarter than everyone else in the class. So the teachers failed him, no matter how well he had done in the actual assignment, or did, until it almost resulted in him having to be held back for a year. It was almost funny seeing their faces as they were told that their mistakes would cause him to spend another year in their classes. They all had to go back and fix his grades to make sure that they weren't forced to teach him anymore. That's when Izuku realized he held all of the power. From that moment on, he stopped doing all of his homework. His teachers were absolutely outraged, complaining over and over to the principal about a boy, but the man refused to spend the rest of his week on paperwork to have a quirkless brat expelled. So instead, even if he didn't do any of the work, Izuku passed every assignment. Sure, his grades might have not been very high, but to be fair, he wasn't really expecting them to be. That's how one Izuku Midoriya passed middle school, but now he was in UA. Not all classes required a written report. Now he had to put in effort in order to be where he always dreamed of, a hero, and he was stoked. Do you know how boring it is to attend a school for absolutely no reason? He knew the work, so why should he have to waste 8 hours of his time listening to other people learn about it? When Izuku didn't know something, he searched around for answers until he found them. He memorizes the steps, vocabulary, and layouts of everything he finds. At this point, it was just second nature. He helped an old lady who spoke English to get her cat down from the tree. Upset that he couldn't understand her, he learned English. When he was done with that, he got bored and branched off to other languages. He learned Spanish, French, and, for some reason, Arabic. He found something he didn't know, he learned it, which was awesome because there was almost an infinite amount of things to learn. That did not include basic English, standard high school math, standard high school history, standard high school science, and you get the point. He did not know how to fight. He wanted to learn that. All Might taught him how to build up strength, but Izuku's not All Might. Brute strength will only get him so far. He learned how to make friends, sort of. It has only been a few weeks of school, and everyone in the past wanted him dead except for his mom. What did you expect? Currently, he was making his way over to the teacher's lounge after being asked by Aizawa to meet him there once school was finished. His group of friends had been worried for him, but he had just gave him a smile and grabbed his things once class was over. He gave a few small but firm knocks on the door, which was later opened by Aizawa himself. After motioning him inside, Aizawa took a seat at his desk and Izuku glanced around the room. Everything was perfectly normal. if he ignored the not-so-secretive glances from the other teachers.
"Do you know why you're here, problem child?"
Aizawa finally spoke up, tone flat and emotionless. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck and shrugged. He honestly didn't know. Aizawa hummed before grabbing a paper off from the stack of his desk and holding it out in front of him.
"Midoriya, could you tell me the answer to question 5, please?"
Now Izuku was really confused. He had no idea why he was being asked to solve a random question. Nonetheless, he glanced down at the paper. About 12 seconds passed before he answered. 46? Aizawa nodded, setting the paper down.
"Are you aware of the fact that the exact question was on your math homework last night?"
Now he was very confused. Sure, he knew that it was there. He may not do the work, but he glanced at it to make sure he knows where the class is at. Yet, he has no idea where his home/law and ethics teacher was going about this.
"Midoriya, I called you in here to find out why you aren't doing the homework assigned to you by your teachers. You clearly know how, and you have no problem answering any questions thrown at you during class."
Izuku blinked a few times. That's what this is about? The answer to that should be easy. However, he responded anyway. It's pointless. He had the other teacher's full attention now.
"What do you mean by pointless?"
Aizawa pushed. Izuku frowned. I already know it. Why would I waste my time on something I already know? If the point of homework is to further learn the lesson, then there should be no point in giving it to someone who already knows it already. If the point of homework is to prove you know it, then the questions asked in class should be more than enough to suffice. And since I know you need the work samples, I do the work handed out in class anyway. I see no point in the homework. Part of him was expecting to be slapped, yelled at, or scolded. Another part of him, the one that knew Mr. Aizawa's tendencies, was almost certain he was about to be expelled. He was not expecting, however, the absolutely stunned faces of his teachers and the sudden clapping he heard from the side of the room. Turning, he found himself looking directly at NEZU, the principal of UA. The animal in question gave him a large smile. "Oh yes, that I understand. It is truly tedious to do something of absolutely no value. Don't you agree, Aizawa? Rather illogical, wouldn't you say?" The man in question frowned for a moment before nodding. "It is a problem, though. We as a school cannot simply have you doing nothing for at least half your classes. I'd like to propose a solution, if you wouldn't mind." At first he thought he was talking to Aizawa, but then his eyes met the principal's and he found himself nodding. "I would like you to come to my office first thing tomorrow to take a test of sorts." He tilted his head. "A test? What kind?" Nezu's smile grew. "You'll have to come see, won't you?" Izuku felt his own lips twitch up with a hint of a smirk. It's been a while since he found something interesting to do, so he might as well. Nezu's grin turned feral, the rat somehow knowing his answers already. "I'll see you tomorrow then, Mr. Midoriya. You may go home now. Apologies for keeping you." With a final bow to his teachers, he turned and left, thinking about everything that could possibly be on the test.
"What are you doing?" Aizawa grumbled to his boss once the problem child had left.
"I'm simply giving Mr. Midoriya a chance to show what he can do. Is there something wrong with that?" Nezu turned his head to Aizawa. The man in question frowned.
"Yes, I don't need you corrupting my student."
"Oh, please," Nezu waved off. "You worry too much." Aizawa scoffed.
"Yeah, right."
The next day, Izuku came to school with a small bounce to his step. He wasn't sure what Principal Nezu had planned, but he was excited to find out. He made his way over to the student's proclaimed rat god, hitting his thigh with his palm as he went along. The door swung open on its own when he stepped in front of it. Pretty useful. Saves time. "Mr. Midoriya, perfect timing. Come on in," Nezu cheerfully called out. Entering the room, he saw the principal sitting behind a desk, drinking his tea. A similar cup of tea on the opposite side of the desk, right in front of Izuku. He took a seat, reaching forward and grabbing the hot drink. He took a sip, not losing his eye contact with the rat for even a second. Eventually, Nezu smiled. "I'm glad you could make it, Mr. Midoriya. Tell me, what do you like to learn?" Izuku nodded without the slightest hint of hesitation. He did, just not in the classroom. Nezu reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a thick stack of papers. You are excused from class today. Instead, I would like you to focus on filling this out. It will progressively get harder as it goes along, so I know that you are not expecting to know everything. I would just like to see where you're at." Izuku nodded, taking the packet and looking it over.
"All right, do you care where I do it?"
"Wherever you're comfortable," Nezu answered. Izuku raised a brow.
"Wherever?"
Nezu's smile grew slightly wider. "Wherever." All teachers and students had a 30-minute break after lunch. Most students would stay in the cafeteria chatting with friends. As such, most teachers took the time to relax in the teacher's lounge before class started back up. Which is how every teacher saw the absolutely confused face of Lunch Rush as they walked into the room. Ectoplasm was the one to ask the question.
"Everything okay?"
Lunch Rush was silent for a moment before speaking.
"Can someone explain to me why I saw a small green-haired child working on a ridiculously large packet on top of the refrigerator in the kitchen?"
Everyone stared at him for a second before Aizawa sighed.
"That would be Midoriya. Nezu gave him a test to see what he knows of the school curriculum. Unfortunately for us, our principal told him that he was allowed to take the test wherever he wanted. The kid always takes everything too seriously."
Quite a few teachers ended up trying to hold in their laughs. Yamada didn't even bother, just bursting into laughter despite the dirty looks of his husband sent him. Turns out, there's such thing as karma. When Yamada walked into his classroom, the listener was waiting for him underneath the desk. They didn't want anything, no, but he was more happy just to chill under the desk to work on their question. For the most part, Yamada forgot about him. The listener didn't bother him, and he didn't bother the listener. He didn't even think his class would know about the fact that the kid was under there. When class ended, he grabbed his things to move on to the next classroom. Midoriya followed. He had to admit it was rather amusing to hear his kids shriek, to see their absolutely shocked faces at discovering they had a visitor this whole time. Midoriya didn't come with him the next class. In fact, Yamada didn't see him whatsoever after that, or at least all the way up until the end of school. Turns out he spent the rest of the time doing a test outside under a tree. It was rather cold, though, so he was glad that the kid came in wearing a sweater. Nezu was waiting for him. Izuku walked up to his principal and gave him the packet. He almost made it to the end. A good handful of questions were bound to be incorrect, since he had guessed on a small chunk at the end he had yet to learn. The only reason he was able to fill anything out on them was because of the small glimmers he had caught of similar problems in the past. "Ah, thank you, Mr. Midoriya. How did it go?" Nezu asked as he took the work out of the teen's hands. "Fine. Most of it was boring. Some of it I wasn't sure of. Working out those was pretty entertaining. I got frustrated near the end when I stopped recognizing the questions." A small blush was present on his face, like he was embarrassed to admit it. Nezu nodded. "Understandable. You're free to leave now. Your mother won't be happy if you're late." Izuku nodded, giving a small bow and leaving to go home. The next morning, all of the teachers walked in to find identical packets on their desk. Each of them were marked with a different section. Art and History for Midnight, English for Mike, Math for Ectoplasm, Law and Ethics for Aizawa, and Science for Cementos, and Heroics for All Might. Other teachers, like Power Loader and Snipe, as well as the staff, like Recovery Girl and Lunch Rush, had a packet too, with sections marked for them anyway. Everyone went over everything for a few minutes on their own before a discussion broke out.
"I thought the tests were supposed to be on the subject he took,"
Snipe asked. When no one made a move to comment, he continued.
"My class is reserved for second and third years, but there's a section for my class out here as well."
Midnight gave a confused look.
"How'd the kid do?" "Better than he should have. I teach a variety about 24 different weapons. Sport knows about safeties about almost all of them. He also confirmed knowing how to use a total of 19 of them proficiently and another 3 of them at their basic purposes."
The other teachers were looking at him with wide eyes as Power Loader nodded. "He's not in my support class, but it seems he knows more than 85% of my first years and 28% of my second years. Sonny knows a few medical procedures too. If he wasn't so dead set on being a spotlight hero, I would have taken him on as an apprentice," Recovery Girl stated. Aizawa let out a hum at that comment.
You'd be wrong about that.
Most of the teachers in the room turned at him shocked. Meanwhile, All Might looked down at his papers with a frown, as Mike, who had already read his husband's portion, nodded.
At first it seems like Problem Child didn't have a preference, but near the end he mentioned quite a few things, a lot of which leads me to believe that he'd much rather be a hero like Hisashi or I, rather out in the spotlight for the entire world to see.
Aizawa explained. Many people turned to his section in the packet and discovered him to be right. It really did sound like the kid would rather not be a major spotlight hero. As a matter of fact, it looked like the kid strongly disliked quite a few of the top heroes. After some more discussion, the teachers came out to realize how far ahead he was in all of their subjects. He'd almost completely aced Mike's portion, if it weren't for the large scientific words at the end that even the man himself didn't even know of. NEZU entered the room about 5 minutes before class started. Ah, good. It seems like you guys had enough time to look over and discuss Mr. Midoriya's results. Seeing as it's Friday, I will have him go to his normal classes today. However, I think it's best for him to move up a few grades in a few of his subjects. He'll be taking art history, science, and weapons training with the third years. Math will be with the second years. He'll continue heroics and law and ethics with the first years to gain as much experience as possible. Of course, he's completely tested out of Yamada's class, so I'll replace that time with medical training with Recovery Girl. The support labs will also be open to him, should he choose to pick it up as a hobby. Aizawa frowned.
What do we do when he's done with our curriculum then? Once he finishes this year, he'll be done with all 3 of his classes.
NEZU nodded. That time will be spent on either with me, or a class of his choosing, or one of his sessions with any of teachers who are free to improve and learn as much as he can. Most teachers still had questions, but they needed to get to their classes. They'd find their answer one way or another. Izuku received his new schedule from NEZU when he was done with his classes. He was surprised, sure, since he hadn't realized that he knew so much. However, he still had a small content feeling in his chest. He'd finally spent time at school learning. He'd still get to be with his class at points of the day, so he wasn't being isolated. And he'd get to class not normally offered to the students. He went home with a little bit more pep in his step that day. His mom was ecstatic when he showed her. She even made katsudon to celebrate his accomplishment. Izuku was almost disappointed that it was the weekend. He couldn't wait to start his classes. Thankfully, he knew just how to pass the time. He was going to learn everything he missed or didn't know on that test, even if it killed him.